Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to the 0 by 50 Community Series. The topic of tonight's event is food and organics. There's a lot of opportunities to do fun things on a spring evening in Missoula, so I'm really grateful that you chose to spend your evening here with us today. Raise your hand if you've been to one of these before. Okay. So, for those of you who haven't, the genesis of this series is the 0 by 50 initiative, which is the name of Missoula's effort to move the community towards zero waste. The city council passed a adopted a resolution in 2016 to reduce the amount of solid waste that the community sends to the landfill by 90% by the year 2050. So that's now known as 0 by 50, Missoula's pathway to zero waste. Last year, the city adopted the 0 by 50 plan. And one of the big pieces of the plan and the piece that we heard when we did the planning process, what we heard from the community was that education was a huge part of getting to zero waste. People needed to understand why it was important and how to do it. So this is a response to that community need that we identified. So part of educating the community about why and how resulted in an amazing community effort that generated a website, 0by50missoula.com, which we like to call an online resource for all things zero waste in Missoula. We have these amazing little calling cards for the website that were graciously produced by the Good Food Store, who's a proud sponsor of 0 by 50. So they printed 5,000 of these things so that we could get them out to the community and people could start using that website. A lot of people from the community have contributed to making that website happen. It's got an amazing search function where you can search for a specific material and find out what you can do with it in Missoula. There's using the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle, as kind of the framework for that. So there's things like e-waste and batteries and food and glass and lots and lots of stuff. I think we have 21 different categories of materials on there. So I encourage you to check it out, 0by50missoula.com. Take a card if that's hard for you to remember, or take a card and share it with your pals. Spread the word. Thank you to the Good Food Store for helping us get the word out about this website. So before we get started tonight, I want you all to know that we're super lucky that MCAT is here tonight. MCAT, this event is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistant grant that was donated by MCAT for this series. So super excited. That means that this is going to be available on the internet at some point. The second event that we had in this series on plastic was recorded by MCAT, and that will air the first Friday and Saturday of June. So if you have nothing to do Friday and Saturday evenings in June, tune in, learn all about plastic. I want to thank Free Cycles for hosting this event tonight. I want to thank all the folks who have come together to tell us about what they're doing around reducing food waste and increasing composting in Missoula. And I want to thank all of the folks who are the zero waste aligned businesses who have come to represent and let you all know what they're up to, helping us along Missoula's pathway to zero waste. I also want to thank Sarah Lundquist and Caitlin Lewis, who were the main drivers in making this event possible tonight. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to walk us through what we're about to do here tonight, starting with a little presentation.
So like Jeremy said, my name is Sarah, and in the spring I was an intern with Home Resource, and this community series was one of the projects that I took on during my time with Home Resource. I am a grad student in the environmental studies program at the university, and one of my main passion is waste and waste reduction. So hence this series, and I'm really excited that everyone's here. We have a lot of awesome guests here today who are going to tell us all about reducing food waste. First, I wanted to start just running over our agenda and what's going to happen today. Although maybe before I say this, I should say that snacks in the back. So at any point, feel free to go back there and get some snacks. The bathroom is right back there, too. Okay, so our agenda. So we already are welcoming you, and we're going to go through the agenda. And then Caitlin and I are going to do a brief presentation about wasted food and just kind of go over why it's a problem and start to outline some solutions that are out there to address food waste. And then we're going to introduce the food recovery hierarchy, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, but this is kind of how our panelists are structured. We have 4 guest speakers, and they're each going to talk about one aspect of this hierarchy. And then after that, after all the panelists have given their presentations, I'm going to invite them back up, and we're going to do a Q&A discussion session with the panelists. So if you have any questions during the panelist presentations, hold on to them, and I want to make sure that we ask those after everyone has gotten a chance to speak. So just remember those questions that you have while people are presenting. And then after that, we're going to transition. We have some folks here from Hellgate High School, too, who are going to talk for a couple minutes about their composting club. And then after that, then we're going to have, hopefully this will happen organically, but we're just going to kind of come into a more informal discussion. Like Jeremy said, we have some guests here who are tabling. So we'll invite all of you to just go around and kind of talk to all our tablers and figure out what they're doing in the community with regard to reducing food waste. And then at the end, we have a lot of stuff going on today. If you're able to hang out, Caitlin and I are going to do a compost lesson, a backyard composting lesson. So if you want to learn how to compost, hang out until the end. And we'll teach you. So I always like to start these events off just reading our mission statement for this series. So the mission of the community series is to spark conversation about opportunities for waste reduction and prevention and inform the community about current innovative efforts to address wasted materials in Missoula. So like I said, we're going to start with a presentation outlining the problem of wasted food, but we didn't want to get too bogged down into that. So then we're going to move on to solutions land, which is a land that I like to live in. Okay, so to start off with, I have a question for you all. What material makes up the largest portion of landfilled municipal solid waste? So in other words, what's the most common type of garbage? Does anyone have a guess?
Newspaper?
Newspaper? No, but paper is close. Food, yes. Yeah, so if you've been to either of our other events, I've shown this graph. Apparently this is my favorite graph I like to show. But this is the EPA's most recent data about the municipal solid waste in landfill in the US. So as you can see here, food is the largest one at 22%. And you can even expand that more into just include all organics, and that, I haven't done the math, but that would include that wood section, paper and paperboard, yard trimmings, all those organics probably, I think, add up to over 50%. So just a lot of what's going to landfill is organics. And so why is that a problem? I get this question a lot. People always, when I talk about organics in landfill, people are always confused, and they ask, well, it's food, it's just going to break down in the landfill, right? And yes, that's true, but the decomposition that happens in a landfill is different than decomposition that would happen in a compost pile or out in nature. And the reason for that is oxygen. So in a landfill, which is capped and covered, that's what is called an anaerobic environment. So that just means that there's no access to oxygen. So different types of bacteria and other decomposers thrive in an environment without oxygen versus an environment with oxygen. And those decomposers that live without oxygen, those ones produce methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas, about 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's a big deal. And even landfills that have methane capture systems, I've read reports that say that it's not possible to capture all of that methane. And the EPA estimates that landfills are the third largest emitter of methane gas in the United States. So it contributes to the greenhouse effect and to climate change is one reason why we don't want to be sending food and organics to landfill. And this other picture up here is just talking about compost and how in a compost pile, again, because of the decomposers that live there and that are breaking down the food, there's very minimal greenhouse gases that are emitted in that process. So we like to we're proponents of composting instead of landfilling. But then really the main reason I would say we want to be worried about wasted food is the same reason that for any type of waste. So waste itself is it's really a representation of all the resources and inputs that we're wasting when we just throw that away. So if you think about all the food that we're eating and the food that we're wasting has a backstory. And so it takes water to produce it, it takes energy, labor, land, transportation, storage, and then it also costs money to do all this stuff. So when you waste that, it's just wasting all of those inputs. And I had a couple statistics for you. The average carrot travels about 1,800 miles to get to your plate. So if you throw that away, you're wasting all of that energy that went into transporting that carrot. And then food waste is about 25%. It makes up about 25% of the U.S.'s fresh water use. So again, just a lot of resources that we're wasting when we waste food and organics. I'm sorry to throw a bunch of numbers at you, but I'm sure a lot of you have heard this statistic before that about between 30 and 40% of the U.S.'s food supply is wasted. And what that equates to is about 133 billion pounds or $161 billion. So again, this is just like helping you conceptualize how much resources and just how much we're wasting with this food. So now I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin, who's going to talk more. There you go.
Get my little mic set up here. Okay, cool. So it's always, all these big numbers are, I feel like, more attainable when we think about like what's happening in our landfill, what's happening in Missoula's landfill. Really bring it home, and it's really great that we actually have these numbers now. So in 2017, I think the study was done. They looked at the Missoula landfill and said, what's actually in our landfill? And what they found was these numbers up here, and bolded are the organics, so paper, food, yard trimmings, wood, and that ends up being about 65% or more that could be composted. And so that's what we're actually looking at here in Missoula. And so the crazy amount is like projected to be 91 to 100,000 tons in 2018 of municipal waste will go in our landfill in a year. So it's just a lot. But we'll get out of all the gloom of food waste and talk about some of the great ways that we can solve food waste and organics waste. And so there's a lot of room for growth, which is really cool. A lot of business growth opportunities, tackling this in nationwide for all sorts of different collections, for farmers, for restaurants, for engineers, for computer designers, for app designers. There's so much potential here. And because it's such a big problem, there can be lots of solutions, which is cool. So if you want to talk about prevention, there's a lot of ways to help prevent food waste, which is like consumer and production education programs. Labeling is a huge problem and why a lot of food gets thrown away. And so if there was a better standardization for date labeling or a less strict date labeling program, waste tracking and analytics for restaurants and hospitals and schools and big organizations that go through a lot of food on a daily basis. And so that's where there's a lot of technology potential, which is cool. We should probably eliminate all-you-can-eat buffets, even though we love them in our country. There's a lot of waste there. Improving management strategies and really adopting and loving imperfect produce. And so there's like a picture of a beautiful pepper that probably got thrown away because it wasn't the standard. And so there's a lot of produce in our country that goes to waste because it doesn't look like we want it to look. So those are prevention strategies. And then there's the recovery side, which you think of the food bank often. This is the food that is edible, but it's not going to cut it in the restaurant or the grocery store. So to improve that recovery, there needs to be more like donation education, software, businesses that are just doing that transporting, and adding value to those products. And you can do that on a small home scale. So it looks like saving all your vegetable scraps and cooking with them, right, instead of throwing them out. But that can also happen on a larger scale of value-added products with food that was potentially waste. And then having tax incentives for donations could also be another solution. So I'm not saying this is like solutions we can all do, but it's ways to look at this big problem and look at all the possibilities. And then what we're really familiar with probably, or at least what I think about often, is the recycling of it. So if you can't prevent it and you can't donate it or recover it, then how do you recycle it? And so that can happen on a home scale, home composting, community composting, gardens, food scrap collection services, and animal feed. And so those are some solutions to think about. And for as big as a problem is, there's a lot of big solutions. Do you want to talk about this?
Sure.
Okay. Sarah came up with another list of resources, and so she's going to share those with you, which is awesome.
Okay, so there's a lot of awesome resources out there that can help individuals address their food waste. So I'm not going to go through everything like specific examples, but there's a lot of apps that you can get on your phone, and a lot of them are free, where they'll help you track the food that you're buying and the food that you have in your fridge. And one of my roommates had this one app one time that she was really excited about that alerted her when the food had been there for a certain amount of time and told her it was time to eat it. So those are awesome things that you can use. There's also websites that have those kinds of resources too. Lists and meal planning, which is something that I kind of struggle with, but really planning ahead is really one of the best ways that individuals can address their food waste. I find personally that if I sit down and choose the meals that I'm gonna cook throughout the week and only buy the ingredients for those, I'm wasting a lot less food than if I go to the store and just get a bunch of random ingredients for things that I think I might make. Let's see. There's also some really cool websites out there that talk about different ways to cook with and repurpose food scraps. So like a classic example that I always hear about is you can make your own veggie stock with things like onion skins and pepper cores and things like that. And yeah, so if you're curious about that, come talk to me, because I have a couple websites in particular that have good blog posts about this. And then also food storage guides. And so I'm sure probably a lot of people know this already, but I didn't know this until last year, that your fridge there's certain spaces that are ideal for storing certain types of foods. So there's like different humidity ranges throughout the spaces of the fridge that are there on purpose so that your food, the different types of food, can last longer. So like, for example, the drawers in your fridge, one of them is typically a crisper drawer, or it's really dry, and the other one is really humid. So there's different types of food that will last longer if you store them in those different areas. And again, if you're curious, this picture up here is of a fridge organization guide. It's a really awesome resource that just tells you where the best place in your fridge to put certain types of food is to make it last longer. So come talk to me if you want access to that too, because that's a really great resource. Okay, so now we're going to move into our panelist presentations. So I just wanted to introduce you to this food recovery hierarchy. The picture that I have up here is kind of a modified version of this hierarchy that the EPA created. So if you think, this is kind of like the reduce, reuse, recycle hierarchy, but this is specifically for food. So at the top is the most preferred options to deal with wasted food, and then at the bottom is the least preferred. So at the top we have source reduction. So reducing, again, is always the best way to deal with waste. And then we have food for people, food for animals, and then composting at the bottom. And we didn't even put landfill on here because we don't want to encourage people throwing food in the trash. Okay, so we have 4 guest speakers, and they're gonna focus on each portion of the hierarchy. So to start with, I'm gonna invite Trevor Lowell up here from Dining.
Thanks. All right. I just wanted to start, I think diversity is a really important part of our community, and I'm so grateful to be at an event where the GOAT contingency is represented. So I think that's really great. I am the sustainability director at Dining, so I do a number of things related to food. I work for the dining department. One of the big things that I do is think about food waste and how to mitigate that. I did want to start and just give a shout out to Finch, because a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are things that actually implemented at the university. So, and is sort of why I'm here to talk about this in the first place. But Sarah had asked me if I would come and talk about source reduction. And so the framework that a lot of you probably are familiar with and dealing with a lot of tricky issues is this idea of upstream and downstream solutions to problems. And so source reduction is really sort of that upstream solution. And it's really appealing for a number of reasons. So the first reason is that generally, especially in dealing with food waste, from an upstream perspective, you have a lot more control over that. So once the food leaves our kitchens and goes out into a buffet line or goes into a pizza box or something like that, we lose a lot of control over what happens to that food. Does it all get eaten? Does it all make it into the compost bin? What happens to that is somewhat or mostly out of our control. When you look at upstream solutions with food waste, institutions, the organizations, the restaurants, the dining establishments, they have a lot of control over what happens in their kitchens, with their staff, with the training, with the implementation of different technologies that can really help eliminate a lot of that stuff. The other thing I really like about upstream solutions is that they tend to be more impactful, because you're avoiding the whole chain of events that happens after that food has been cooked or goes out to somebody's plate or whatever that is. So if we can reduce the food waste in the kitchen and reduce how much is actually getting wasted before it even makes it to those different steps, then all the energy required to move that food through those steps is also avoided and saved. The third thing in this example about upstream solutions is that with what I'm going to talk about especially is that it can actually be a money saver. So in the realm of sustainability work, it can be really frustrating and sort of demoralizing because a lot of the things you want to do cost money, right? So we wanted to switch all of our disposables to compostable materials at the university, and we've done that, but it costs us extra money because those materials cost more money. With reducing food waste, there are ways you can do that that actually save organizations and restaurants money, and so it makes the sell a lot more powerful for people who may be less focused on the sustainability issues and more focused on the business issues. So what I'm going to specifically talk about is a software program that we use that's called LeanPath. There are a couple other programs out there that are similar, but it's a really simple idea. So we cook, we have 2 large production kitchens on campus, and we have all these different outlets through which we serve food. So the main one is the Food Zoo Dining Hall, which is an all-you-can-eat buffet. I hear you on the all-you-can-eat thing, but I do get to eat lunch there every day, so it's sort of amazing. But we have retail outlets, we have a full-service catering operation, we have a sit-down restaurant, we have copy operations. But most of that food really starts in those big production kitchens. And what LeanPath is it's very simple technology that tracks the amount of food. Well, it tracks what you're doing with your food. So in our big production kitchens, we have iPad or tablet interfaces spread throughout the kitchen connected to scales. And when one of your chefs, one of your student workers is doing a task, and say they're peeling potatoes, and they have all these potato skins, and they would normally just put them in the compost bin. Well, what LeanPath does is it adds a step before you take those potato skins and put them in the compost. You put it on the scale, and then you log a bunch of metrics into that tablet. So you say, who are you? What are you doing? So this is, what is the item that you're weighing? It's potato skins. How much does it weigh? What are you doing with it? And then it'll log the date, and it'll log, all this great information that then gets stored on the software. And then we have access. So our executive sous chefs and our big production chefs, myself, have access to all this data that aggregates throughout the day in our kitchens. So that scale is being used 50, 100 times during the day to weigh 25 pounds of onion peels, to weigh spoiled meat, to weigh something, whatever that thing is. All that information goes into this software. And there's a number of benefits that come out of that. One of them is just the sort of psychological benefit of having your staff think about what they're doing and the food that they're wasting. So if someone is cutting potatoes or they have this waste and they just put it in the bin and it goes away and it's out of sight, out of mind. If they have to go to this tablet and put it on a scale and quantify it, and then there's a number that comes up and it says, this is 20 pounds of potato peels, and then they have to sort of put their name and sort of become the responsible party for that. It adds a really powerful sort of awareness to that staff member to say, wow, today they can look back and I can think of 100 pounds of food that I put in the compost bin. So it makes people a little bit more conscious. It sort of helps with the buy-in aspect of it because it puts a number, quantifies that problem for them. And it also makes them a little more cautious in their what they're doing, in their knife skills and their training, which is sort of the second big benefit that we have seen from it. Whereas because people are logging who they are and what they're throwing out, you can go back through the production sheets and you can say, and compare workers to each other and say, okay, last week we asked Justin to peel these potatoes and he peeled 100 pounds of potatoes and he ended up with X amount of potato skins. This week we've asked Austin to do it and there's 20% less waste when he does it. So what's going on with Justin? Maybe he needs some time to have a refresher on knife skills. Maybe we need to sit down with him and see how he's peeling. What is he throwing out? It gives you that sort of window into how your staff is dealing with that waste and who maybe needs some more attention on their skills and how they're doing those tasks in the kitchen. But really the biggest benefit of this software package is that it allows you to control your forecasting a lot better. So especially in all-you-can-eat dining in large kitchens, large production kitchens, our catering kitchen and stuff like that, the rule of thumb is overproduce, because from a customer standpoint, the worst thing you can do is run out of food, especially in catering, but even in the food zoo dining hall. If students come in and there's 45 minutes left and we don't have any more entrees for them, we don't, half the buffet line is gone. It doesn't really look good for us. It's not the expectation that they have. They've spent a lot of money on a meal plan for us to feed them. And so for us to not be able to do that, often the sort of industry standard is you just overproduce. So you think you need 8 pans of lasagna, you cook 10. And we have a lot of great outlets for the food that we do overproduce. But again, if we can not make that food, we've avoided all the energy embedded in that process. We've avoided having to even think about what to do with it at the end result. So the forecasting component is huge, and what LeanPath allows us to do is, we can look at the days and compare the menu and say, okay, we made lasagna 2 months ago, and we made 10 pans of it, and we had to donate 3 and throw out 1. So, if you get enough information there, it gives you the confidence to say, we don't need to make 10 pans of lasagna. We know how big our student population is. We know what our traffic is. So we know with more confidence how much we're going to be throwing out, and so we can produce less of that. And one of the most powerful benefits of that, it goes back to the financial impact. So when you install LeanPath, what they do is they come in and they'll do a baseline test for you. So you'll track all your food waste for a week, and then you implement LeanPath and do the trainings and sort of get your staff up to speed on it, and then they compare what you've wasted to that baseline test. And so when we look at what our baseline is compared to how much food we're wasting now, we've saved tens of thousands of dollars a year just by not having to make that food, by having staff that's better trained and more efficient with the food. And that is what really appeals to a lot of the people who have more authority than I do to make a lot of these decisions. And so if I can say, hey, not only can we avoid making the waste, but I'm going to save you $50,000 a year if we implement, a $1,000 piece of software and a tablet to train your staff to do it. So it's been a really powerful tool for us, and it's going to have different applications for different organizations. So we benefit greatly because we're such a big operation and we make so much food. So the impact is, I can see complications maybe if you're a smaller sort of sit-down restaurant and you're doing more sort of cook-to-order things. But LeanPath has been really great, and the other, I do not get commission from LeanPath. It's just the only one I'm familiar with. But the other ones are great as well, in that they give you this knowledge and they give you a really clear snapshot of what's going on in your kitchens and how you can reduce that. The other quick plug I'll make as far as source reduction that we've done is sort of what in this realm of what they call like choice architecture. So if you walk into the food zoo, you can eat all that you want. So many years ago, we used to have big trays and 16-ounce cups and plates, and so students would grab a tray, walk through the whole food zoo, and you grab a little bit of everything that looks good. And the problem with that is then you sit down and you eat it, and by the time you're halfway through it, you're full and you can't eat the rest of the food on your tray. And so we took the trays away many years ago and did an audit after that and found that it reduced the food waste coming out, the post-consumer food waste, by 60%, just by not having that much real estate for the students to put the food. So we did the same thing with our cups. We had a 16-ounce cup. We now have a 12-ounce cup. We're talking about shrinking that maybe even more. We talked about shrinking the plates. It just adds another step so that, if you can only fit so much in a plate and then you sit down and eat it, by the time you've eaten that, you've sort of digested it a little bit and your body is telling you, okay, I'm done, versus you walking through with this huge tray. And human nature is to be a little bit greedy and a little bit gluttonous and say, I'm going to take a little bit of all of this. So I think there are really interesting ideas that we can look at that really don't cost businesses that much money, but are sort of more of these choice architecture, psychological fixes to some of these things. So thanks.
Thank you.
That's my phone.
All right, thank you, Trevor. So now I'm going to invite Kelly up, who's going to talk about feeding people.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. My name's Kelly. I work at Missoula Food Bank and Community Center. And like Sarah said, I'm here to talk about making sure that good food goes to people, as sort of, if we're not going to reduce it, sort of this way to extend the life of food. And we do that at our food bank in a few really big ways. And one of them is our grocery rescue program. And so we have a few vehicles that every day, 5 days a week, drive around town and they pick up food mostly from grocery stores. And so they drive around and truly we share with the POV, the grocery rescue program in Missoula, but we do most of it. There's a few grocery stores that the Poverello Center picks up as well. Anyway, our trucks go out starting at 7 a.m. in the morning, and we drive around town to Albertsons and Costco and Fresh Market and Rosars and Good Food Store, all the grocery stores that you can think of, and we pick up food that they have set aside for us that for the most part is food that they're not going to sell, that they can't sell. Sometimes it's food that they've over-ordered or food that they got the next shipment of whatever it is into their grocery store, and so they just have too much of it. They have too much lettuce, and so it won't fit into their coolers, and they'll make some quick swaps and keep the freshest stuff likely for their grocery store and give us the stuff that maybe has been there for a day or two. And we bring it back to the food bank in these trucks, and then we have volunteers. We're so lucky. We have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that literally check every single piece of donated food before it either goes into our store or we do something else with it. And they check it to make sure that it's good. We only put good food in our store. That doesn't mean food that's like the funky pepper. We would put that into our store, but really to make sure that it's healthy for people to eat. And so we check it, and then it goes into our grocery store. Most of the grocery rescue food that we get is perishable food items, and so oftentimes it has to do a lot with those sell-by dates that were mentioned earlier. And so they're just a marketing scheme, right? They're not actually when food goes bad. It's when, the producer of that product has lobbied somebody important somewhere to print it on their packaging and say that this food needs to be gone by this time. We know that because the health department allows us at the food bank to extend those dates by quite a bit. And so it depends on the product. Like milk is 1 week past the expiration date. Yogurt is 3 weeks past the expiration date. Canned goods, the health department says that we could use for 10 years past the date that is on there. We don't, because no one will take them. No one will take them off of our shelves. So we do 2 years past the expiration date on canned goods, and we do 1 year. We're allowed to do 1 year past the expiration date on boxed goods, so cereals and pastas and dry items like that. But in grocery rescue, oftentimes for the perishable items that we get, it's the food that we get is what I call, on edge. And that means that there's a reason that the grocery stores aren't selling it themselves. And Costco is the example that I kind of always use. They sell obviously in bulk oftentimes, but they'll have like the big package of peppers, of bell peppers, and there's 6 in that package typically. And if one of those gets squishy, no one is going to buy that. No one. Like they won't. I don't, right? I'll go there, but I would get the one that has 6 edible peppers in it. And so generously, I guess, they save all of that food that no one's going to buy for us. And we pick it up, and we've figured out the right system for almost all of the things, but at most of the grocery stores, they keep it refrigerated until we get it. We haul it in a refrigerated vehicle, we bring it back. It's a quick transition. We volunteers sort that out, keep the 5 perfectly good peppers and put them into our store, and the one that doesn't seem edible for people then gets put into what we call our goat bins. And so we partner with pig and goat farmers that come by multiple times a week, 2, typically 3 now, times a week, and they pick up this food that we've saved for animals that is deemed good for animals but not good enough for people. And there's a lot of that, but I would say that about 85% of the food that we get in grocery rescue is perfectly good. It's perfectly good. And we're really happy to have that available for our customers, right? It's an interesting conversation in food banking, in food insecurity, to talk about food waste and how that could be a part of the conversation around hunger issues. And I want to be really clear that we don't ever go out and say, like, this could be the solution to solving hunger, to solving food insecurity. No, we believe that the real solutions are policy issues, right? If we could change policy issues around housing, for example, in Missoula, that would put us much closer to people being able to afford and access food every single day. What we're known for, of course, is emergency food assistance. And so that in itself isn't a solution to hunger, right? So this grocery rescue program that we have is a huge piece of that. We buy very little perishable food items. We do buy milk. We accept milk donations. We just don't get very many of them. And so we purchase milk. We purchase some vegetables between, I'd say, December and now, right? And then when it's not the growing season around here. And we purchase, what else do we purchase that's perishable? Maybe occasionally we get like the specific donation for something. I'm going to give you money and I want you to buy chicken with it. Well, then we have to buy chicken with it. We do happily, and then we have some of that protein in our store or something. But for the most part, 99% of the perishable items that we get, that we're able to source in our store, comes from grocery rescue. Comes from us being able to save it from the grocery stores to make sure, we sort through it. And so oftentimes it's things like a head of lettuce that you just peel off the two outside leaves and it's perfectly good, but it's already, wrapped in plastic or something like that. And the grocery stores, typically, most of them aren't going to do that. And so we can just extend the life of that food in a very real way. And last year, I don't know, that sheet says it was like over 1 million pounds, 1.2 million pounds of food that we collected in grocery rescue alone. So that's a huge deal, right? I mean, it's a huge deal for us to be able to get that food for people to eat, and it's certainly a huge deal for our landfill and our environment. The next program that I'll talk about is called Food Circle, and so that's one that we partner with lots of restaurants and businesses that produce prepared meals for people. And so there's over 20 partners in that program now. It's grown. We were able to get a grant to pay for another vehicle, honestly, that would allow us to go pick it up. But how it works is we provide these trays, sort of the big buffet trays or something like that, and for anybody that we partner with, and they sort of sit there. We find a spot in each restaurant or each kitchen that they can sit, and we get on a schedule depending on how much food they produce. And so we go to the university 5 days a week, for example, and pick food up there. But some restaurants it's every other day, or some it's on call. We try to be as flexible as we can on making ourselves available to make it easy to go pick that food up. We pick up food that was made in a restaurant that never made it to the table or never made it onto the buffet line, because if it makes it actually onto the buffet line, then we can't, the health department won't let us, capture it. And so, but it's those extra pans of lasagna, right, that we then can take back, and we have volunteers that then scoop it out of those trays and put it into these little containers and put a lid on it, and we freeze them solid, and we then serve them like TV dinners in our store. And they're so valuable for people because a lot of our customers have limited cooking ability or access. So a microwavable meal is a pretty big deal. And some of them, we're already working 3 jobs, and eating on the go is something that's very real. I say that it's some of the best food that we have in our grocery store. It's amazing. And the volunteers that work in there have to be pretty creative, because it could be a chicken breast from Cafe Dolce and green beans from the university and mashed potatoes from the hospital that are going to go into the chicken dinner, right? So they put them all into this thing. And I'll tell you, the health department hates this program. There's a lot of there's a lot of hoops that have to be. We temp it when we pick it up, we haul it in the right vehicle, we temp it when we get back. Ingredient labeling is a big deal. All the things. But it's worth it. It's worth it for so many reasons. It's worth it because it's more good food for good people, and it's less waste, and all of those things. And so we're really happy to do it. We've in other towns around Montana have tried to emulate this, and they haven't either been willing, or their health department hasn't been willing to figure out all of the loopholes that make it work. But last year it was over 50,000 pounds, I think, almost 60,000 pounds of food. And that is 100% that goes, well, I'll say, so I can say 100% because if it's not freezable, then we're lucky we have a really good partnership with the POV. And so we take those trays directly to the POV, or they pick them up almost every day. Either we have it figured out, but so something like salad, coleslaw, things like that, don't work for us because we only have that frozen solid model for Food Circle. But they happily take it, and it all sort of stays in. Did I say before that the food that lands Food Circle or grocery rescue, perishable foods that come to the food bank, they land in our store for sure less than for 48 hours, but oftentimes for less than 24 hours. Because we're picking up the morning of, we're putting it out the day of, and that's just what we have for the day. And so we set our limits for what customers can shop for based on the food that we have, and feel really good about that. Some days there's a lot more, and customers, we can give them more. And other times, there's less, and we manage that in a comparable way. But our selection in our grocery store would be so much less if we didn't have our grocery rescue and our Food Circle program. The last thing that I'll mention that I hadn't thought of until one of you was talking was we also have a learning kitchen in our food bank and community center. And not for this environmental reason, but for the extend your budget reason. We have lots of classes, and all of our cooking classes are free, but we have a lot of classes that are taught up there that are like extending the life of food. And so what to make with vegetable scraps, right? 3 ways to use a rotisserie 3 meals out of 1 rotisserie chicken was a class that we had, reconstituting baguettes. And lots of people come to them, and lots of people come that are our customers, but lots of people come from the community as well. And so sort of trying to educate and make that more of a realistic option for people to think about extending the life of the food that they purchase, or the food that they get in our grocery store also. So I think that's it.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so now I'm going to invite Sam up and the goats.
We'll let the boys handle the girls. Those are the Hope sisters with the boys.
One thing I learned early in farming is the only money you really make is the money you don't spend. And that's true. Any money you send off the farm comes out of your bottom line. So early on farming, and I used to run the Opportunity Farm for Opportunity Resource in Frenchtown, and we modeled it after an old-fashioned family farm. So we have sort of a base, and the base actually happened to be the dairy goats because the clients, there was a lot of therapeutic benefits to having the goats around the opportunity clients. And with the goats as the main animal on the farm, goats waste, they only eat 40 to 60% of their food. The rest they lay on. So in an effort to use that food on the farm, we ended up with cows that ate the waste hay. And we also had row crops, and we had a lot of pasture. And we learned about pastured animals versus grain-fed animals, and actually raising pigs off of pasture. And the pigs would eat the whey from the cheese, bad milk, grass, and then they also would eat the hay that the cows didn't eat. But also the pigs also served as our rototillers to prepare new garden sites. So we were looking for ways to feed the pigs mostly. They're omnivores, but the only animal protein they get is dairy products. So we ended up salvaging food scraps from local grocery stores, and also from some of the local community gardens. And when we would get that food at the farm, and I still do it to this date on my own, is we sort it. And we sorted out what's good for the goats, because they can't have anything moldy or rotten, what's good for the pigs, and then the chickens actually get in and steal food from the pigs. So it's sort of hilarious to have a 2 or 3 pound chicken in the same food bowl as a 500-pound pig fighting over food scraps from a local grocery store. And the big thing in having a farm and then working at Opportunity is I found out that because the Opportunity clients receive federal funding, they're protected under some federal laws. So we were having our pigs and cows butchered at a state inspected facility. And then it was provided to the group homes. That's against the law. Has to be done at a federal plant, a federally inspected plant. And so in this process, I also learned that the food scraps that you get from a restaurant or a local store or your neighbors fall under those federal guidelines too. And those are easily found. Harvard University with a couple other organizations did a publication called Leftovers for Livestock. And in it is a general overview. It has the food recovery hierarchy, inverted pyramid, and then it has state-by-state laws in it on how that food is treated. The big thing is just animal products that end up in the food waste system and how those are treated. We are fortunate enough to where we pick up food, and whether it's at a grocery store or restaurant or individuals, they have made an effort not to mix any animal products at all in with the food scraps. One thing we have to do, though, when we go through the produce is pull out hundreds of rubber bands that held broccoli together in twist ties, and we pull the little labels off the fruit. Supposedly the little sticky labels are water-soluble plastic, but I'm not sure of it. And occasionally, we miss those things. So is a generator of food waste, if any you do that, if you could sort of pre-prep the food so it's a little easier to sort at the farm. And some stuff does end up in compost. So what we've learned is to get as much nutrition out of the food as we can before it ends up in the compost pile. And with the goats and their bedding, we generate about 100 yards compost a year, which then goes into the row crop garden, which then feeds us, the community, and back to the animals because they get all the waste food, the cabbage leaves you don't use. I thought I came up with a great idea one day. I was at Ruby's Cafe telling everybody about how, look, I figured out we don't have to pull the corn stalks out of the ground. We could just turn the pigs loose in it and they'll eat them up and poop them out and turn up the ground. And an old timer leaned back to me and said, that's what my grandpa did in South Dakota. So, you know, I thought it was a new idea, but I was actually also happy to hear there was an old idea. So our farm is set up like a diversified family farm with a few pigs, chickens, goats, few cows, and row crops. And we do our best to not spend any money off the farm. And it's another way to get nutritional value out of food that ends up in our system. But what I would encourage everybody here to do is, if there's some nutrition left in your food, find a neighbor who might have backyard chickens that you could, give your leftover salad and greens to. And they'll also let you know, some food we had to reject from one neighbor because they didn't maintain it. They would put it all on the back porch and it would turn to sort of slime. And they don't like onions. So if you can keep the onions out of it, that helps. And also to maintain the food too, if for a neighbor or a farmer. And then one thing that with all the breweries in town, the brewery grains we used when they were available too. A lot of protein in those. Because I guess if, I don't make beer, and I actually don't drink beer, but I guess if you take the protein out of the brewery grain, the beer's bitter. And so there's an incredible amount of protein in spent brewery grain. So if you make beer at home, save the grain for somebody you know with livestock. So.
All right, and last but not least, we have Jason Duffin here from Garden City Compost.
Thank you. Thanks. Last but not least, but I'm on the bottom of the pyramid. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here tonight, and thank you for having me and everybody. This is awesome. Great job getting this all set up. Really honored to be here. It's funny growing up. As a kid, I grew up with my hippie grandma that grew up when you saved all your food, and every scrap that wasn't used went out to the compost pile. We had a huge, all the leaves, all the food waste, everything went out there and got composted, and we put it back into the garden plot at the upcoming season in the spring when we were getting ready to plant again. And then I slowly watched this mentality change. We became just a wasteful community nation, and it was surprising. We don't even notice it because it's happening so slowly over the years. To see the things that are going on these days and seeing people be so mindful with everything that's going on, with everybody that's here today, is just fantastic. All these other events that are going on around town, education, everybody's really getting involved and wanting to be a part of sustainability and not be so wasteful. I'm really lucky at my house. It's my 18-year-old son and I, and then my 8-year-old daughter visits. All three of us eat like horses. Thankfully, fat kid's okay with it. But we don't have a lot of wasted food. But it doesn't matter how well you prepare and look ahead. You're still going to have something that you can't use because you don't want to stop, take that time, bake it into something, or do something with it. So that's where composting comes into play, either in your backyard, which is great because you can set it out there. Make sure you get that stirred up. We'll learn all about that here in a little bit. Or come on down to our facility, Garden City Compost, or one of your local gardens that are around, your local farmers. We've heard so many great ideas today. Anything you can do that works out easiest for you, that gets the job done, is the best thing. I showed up at Garden City Compost. It was eco back then, 13 years ago, and I was going to work there for 2 months because I was starting a business. 13 years later, I'm managing the business, and I love it there. 2.5 years ago, City of Missoula bought it out, and it's been a great thing. We've made a lot of improvements, a lot of wonderful things have happened, and we're starting to really get community involved, which I love. 6 years ago, Walmart started coming to us, and we made an interaction on a composting council down in Texas, and next thing you know, we were starting to get all the trucks from Walmart from every store here in the state, besides 2 of them over east. We get all their wasted food, and it comes down to our facility, and we're able to compost that there in our process. I like to make the joke, because everybody hears our eco-compost or Garden City compost, and you think about poop. But hey, we make miracles happen every day, because poop's going uphill, thank you. But that's not just what we're doing, and thankfully, with everybody that's being involved these days, that's not the only thing we're working with. We're taking in a lot of wood waste, we're taking in a lot of yard waste, we are taking treated biosolids in, and we're mixing that with all these other organics in this community that aren't being put to use, or that people don't have the time to put to use, because we've created a very busy society where you just have to keep moving and keep going and never stop spinning in circles. And in Missoula, you're at least working 2 jobs. So we take in all that food, wasted food, and then we also take in a lot of wasted food from the community, from people that can't use it themselves. One huge thing that has been a part of that, besides local citizens bringing stuff in, such as yourselves, is people like Caitlin and Sean with these, and Missoula Works, Recycle Works, bringing product in. We've seen that amount just boost in our local community, which has been fantastic. I couldn't ask for any numbers right now off the top of my head unless you have something, Sean, but I know we talked.
120 tons and 240,000 pounds.
Just this year.
Yep.
That's fantastic. And it's being put to use. We're putting it right into a cycle, getting it composted, and making sure that it goes back out to the community. We're really working on community outreach, like I was saying a little bit ago, trying to talk with people and educate the public more about what the good is from composting, how good it is, and how useful it is. Because of our biosolids, we're much more monitored, and it's highly political, because manure compost has a lot of the same things in it that treated biosolids does. But there's wasted food in each part of that cycle. So we take that, we put it in our compost piles, and we do oxygen, just like Sarah was saying. That's a huge part in your pile in your backyard. And we just blow air. We got 40 horsepower blowers. It's blowing air into our compost process after we mix it into a big mixer. And it sits there, breaks down. We take it out of that, we screen it, then we let it sit and cure. And that whole time, daily, I'm out there checking those piles. We're checking the temperatures, and then we're taking samples out of these. And we're starting to do in-house sampling as well. It goes a long ways. There's so much that can be done with wasted food that just by composting, because it then goes into reclamation jobs, goes into farmers' fields, goes into local gardens. I know Doug Bleeker, he takes a lot of our compost, and he donates a lot of food to the food bank here in town. And we're just
6,000 pounds last year.
yeah, it's fantastic. He's been doing that for quite a long time. We've been working with him for 8 years now, but he was doing that well before that. So this community involvement and everything that's going on is just fantastic, and we're really proud and happy to be a part of that. There's the more people that open their eyes about wasted food and all these organics that are going away. A lot of people have asked me, well, doesn't that take away from your business? Isn't that just driving you nuts? No, because we're all here to do one thing, the right thing. So seeing this and having everybody's questions and opinions open up, it's fantastic. Just in fruit scraps alone, the carbon and nitrogen ratio, nitrogen being 1, the carbon is 35 to 1 just on fruit scraps. Then your vegetable scraps and coffee grounds and stuff like that is 20 to 1. And these are all important things for composting in your backyard or in a major large facility where we're producing 26,000 yards every year. So there's a lot of benefits out of this stuff that we can put it to use instead of just throwing it into the garbage. So all you can do is continue that, and I can only talk about composting so much. So and we're going to hear a lot more about it here in a little bit. I don't want to take away from anything these educated ladies are going to do in the presentation. But really happy to be here, really happy to see everybody so involved, and let's keep up the great work. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. So I think right now I'm actually going to invite all the panelists to come back up, and if anyone has any questions for them, now's your time to ask. And then after that, we'll have our folks from Hellgate Save Club have a few words to say for us. And then we'll kind of turn you guys loose to our tablers. And then after a few minutes of talking with the tablers, Caitlin and I will invite you to go outside, and if you want to hang out and learn how to compost, we'll teach you. So panelists, come back up. And if you guys could just pass around, there's 2 mics here, if you guys could just pass those around.
We have to have a mic for the person asking the question. Are there any questions?
I have one, but I don't need a mic. I'm loud. I'm crying. It's a pretty simple question, but a lot of talk of food, and I was raised in a frugal time by a frugal mother. We never wasted anything, whether it was tinfoil or food. And I almost never have to throw out any food I've already cooked. But my question is, what about cooked food? Is it okay to throw? Does it compost or not?
Yes, it sure does. That's one thing I didn't quite touch on. Thank you very much. We're taking all sorts of food. The only things that we're leaning away from right now is greases. We're beginning to start taking meats and stuff more at our facility, and you have to worry about bones and whatnot like that, and you always have to deal with that. Just like you were mentioning earlier about the little zip ties and rubber bands and whatnot on the foods. Thankfully, in composting, when you compost properly and you get the right temperatures, that stuff breaks down and it goes away. And cooked food's not a problem. Cooked or raw, it composts the same.
And the dairy.
Yeah, and
it's okay.
Yeah, you have to pay attention to how one big pile of cheese isn't gonna, but as long as you have your grass clippings in there and leaves and other things and do a proper mix, that goes a long ways. Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm concerned about using sludge and the pharmaceuticals that get into that kind of thing.
Yes, ma'am. That's a fantastic question. That gets brought up a lot.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, so pharmaceuticals in the treated biosolids is the question. And I'll just lightly touch on the subject right now. I do have a pamphlet up there with some information about us, and also those ratios, a lot more ratios with wasted food and grass and stuff like that for people composting if you want to grab. And we'll do tours at any time for anybody in the public. People bring up pharmaceuticals a lot. Have you ever used manure compost or something like that?
I had the misfortune to get some manure from a neighbor, which came through horses who had been fed hay that had chlorine on it.
Yeah, and that's a huge worry these days, and that's a big concern. So as much as I hate to hear that, but that is a concern. Yeah, and so those pharmaceuticals, horses, cows, sheep, every animal out there, just like humans, get pharmaceuticals. As far as through our treated biosolids, they're water soluble for the most part. The university did a study years ago, and it took 1 million gallons of our effluent that doesn't come over to us, because ours, again, is solids. It's about 11 to 14%. It took 1 million gallons of the effluent to equal 1 aspirin. We are locally working on, there's been a lot of studies on biosolids. We're locally working on being able to start doing those studies ourselves to help out, educate that within the public and open people's eyes some more. But we don't have any problems. We do a cucumber bioassay test, talk about the Toradon and herbicides. The cucumber bioassay test is where you take cucumber seeds and the compost and vermiculite, plant in that, and they look at the first couple sets of leaves and see how they grow. They look at seedling vigor and seedling growth, and that'll tell you if there's anything in there that's tainting the seed or the growth of it. But we all the studies that we've done, we're part of Northwest Biosolids, which is a great place to get information. Pharmaceuticals are not a concern. I take some heart medication. I take 2 little carvedilol pills a day and a baby aspirin. I eat a lot more than that, and I have a lot more other stuff that goes down into the wastewater stream at my house than that does. And if you think about how much goes into the wastewater treatment facility and their biological process that they go through, those products, it's very minimal and it's non-detectable. But we are working on that locally at the facility here now that we're owned by the City of Missoula so that we can prove that and actually show people numbers. Thank you for that question.
I have another question for you. Where does all the final product go? In what directions? To who is the final compost?
So as much as I hate to say it, we've done a lot of mining in Montana. So there's a lot of reclamation sites that take our product. Like I pointed out earlier, we make 26,000 cubic yards of compost every year. That's a lot of product. So these smaller people and more awareness in the community opening up and composting is actually a good thing for us because we want to see it stay here and get used. But our compost goes, we have a lot of sales that come in, people that come in and just pick it up with pickups. We sell our compost $26 a yard. We also sell an enriched topsoil that we make that can be planted directly into or used in yards. And then we also just started making our lawn top dressing that is strained down to 3/16. But that's for golf courses, soccer fields, lawns, such like that. But the bulk of it is going out to reclamation sites and whatnot, road sites. There's that job out in Frenchtown. They just went through and did the frontage road and the highway. Well, there's a lot of clay out there and a lot of bad soil. So we're sending 1,200 cubic yards out there just for that. So that's being purchased, and funded, but that's where most of it goes. We're getting involved with farmers right now too. So the studies that have been done is amazing on if you go in and use compost instead of using fertilizers. It's more expensive, but over time, your soil tilth, your root structure, and also your crop production, the first year, 60% more growth in crop production in a farmer's field, up to, that is. And the following year, your soil's still so healthy that you don't have to spray it, fertilize it, you don't have to add compost again, depending on how much you applied and stuff like that. But over time, having compost in that field, whether it be the compost you produce there on site with your local farmers or you bought from a large facility such as us, vineyards over east or over west, closer to the coast, Washington, Oregon, they do a lot of composting, stuff like that, and we're working with that locally with our cherry orchards up at Flathead. We're starting to talk to them, and yeah, that's where most of our product goes.
So I have a question for Kelly. You mentioned, buying things, but not selling some, which I assume is because of local producers donating produce. Are there certain types of produce that you just wish more people would donate that your client base is always wanting and you never have?
That's an interesting question. Yes, the answer is because in the summertime is because of the growing season, and it's a lot from Garden City Harvest. We get donations from them, and so excess produce that they produce on their farms or CSAs that don't get picked up, we get donated to the food bank. I guess my answer for you on what would be the most preferred produce to be donated would be whatever is your favorite. That's what I say to everybody because variety is really the key. In our grocery store, we really choice is an important part of our model, and so making sure that customers can choose the things that they want to try or the things that they already love to eat is super important. Dignity is a big part of what we try to offer in our grocery store as much as the food product, and so variety is key. So whatever your favorite veggie is, donate that. And it'll be different for everybody in the room, then we get lots of variety.
So for the UM dining, I was just wondering if you know about other universities having used this technology, or if the U is one of the pioneers of this, or how common it is across other university campuses in the nation.
Yeah, and actually, Ian might be able to weigh in a little bit on like when it was implemented. I think it was maybe 7 years ago for us. That sounds about right. But the company started in this guy's garage, and it's sort of a really simple idea, but it's surprising that nobody else had it for as long as they did it. But I know MSU doesn't use it. I've talked to their farm to college coordinator a little bit about the idea. I'm not aware of any other large institutions in the state, but that doesn't mean that they aren't. I do know it's gotten to a point, actually, LeanPath just entered into a deal with Sodexo, which is one of the largest institutional dining operators in the world. And so they are, if anybody has some money to invest, I would put it in LeanPath right now because they're probably doing pretty well right now. I don't know of anyone else in the state, I guess is the short answer. But I think a lot of that is just oftentimes proof of concept. And so right now we are going through the process of implementing it into our catering kitchen. And there's a lot of concerns because the catering kitchen is just a very different animal than the food zoo production kitchen because it's mainly event and customer driven. Their production techniques are different. Their forecasting is really different. So LeanPath has been very supportive, and we're doing sort of these webinars with them to talk about how our other schools are using this. I know like UC Boulder has been using it for a long time in both of their kitchens. And it's definitely starting to catch on. And actually what you're seeing too is like a lot of these tech companies where if you go get a job with Google or Facebook, they not only do your laundry, but they feed you as well. And so those companies are going through tons and tons of food and are some of the new and the largest players in the institutional dining now that have sort of come in and disrupted this a little bit because they are for profit and maybe have a little bit more money to play around with this stuff and maybe more familiarity with some of the technology and how technology can save them money and advance their sustainability initiatives. So it's definitely starting to catch on at that institutional level. And I think that's really where most of the value is. But, I can see other operations finding value in it too.
Trevor, I'm wondering, how does Dining manage its wasted food stream? What are the ways that happens?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that we're doing sort of throughout that stream, upstream and down. Kelly mentioned the Food Circle program. So we do, I think it's like 2,000 pounds a month of food goes out through that program. We try to do as much source reduction as we can. And then in the Food Zoo Dining Hall, we used to pulp and then dehydrate it and then take the dehydrated food waste to the peas farm and they would compost it for us. The reason that system was the way it was is because food waste is 80 to 90% water. And so it's really tough to move around and it's smelly and it weighs a lot. And I just did a food waste audit for Earth Day. And we generate about 1,000 pounds a week of post-consumer waste just in that dining facility. So you can imagine trying to move 1,000 pounds of wet, smelly food around. It's really difficult. And so the pulper consolidates a lot of that, spins some of the water out, and then it would spit it into this giant food dehydrator. And then it would cook all that water weight out and sterilize it, which also allowed us to, because there are certain concerns with pathogens when you start mixing meat and dairy and stuff like that. And the peas farm wasn't excited about that, but the sterilization process avoided that. So that worked really well for a while. The downside of that system was that the machines were big energy hogs. And so they were fighting the HVAC system in the building, and they run about 18-hour cycles on 220-volt power. So the machines sort of lived their life and have died now. And so we reached out to Sean, and now we work with Sean over there, and working with Sean and a bunch of other students to actually try to build the infrastructure across campus to do this. So like on the university center and the catering kitchen, we don't have compost, but we're bringing LeanPath in, and we're looking at, it's not going to cost us that much more to have Sean stop at the university center and also pick that up. Could we maybe not just have it in our kitchens, but also have it in some of the retail areas where students can take those materials that we've switched to and the food that they might not eat and have a place to put that. So there's a lot of exciting momentum around this, and a lot of it is student-driven, which is really great. So that's a lot of it. And then again, like I get really excited about those choice architecture things where like you don't even know that you're doing the better thing. It's just that the space and the sort of components of that space are pushing people to make better decisions and make more sustainable decisions.
I'm pretty sure Trevor's getting $1 every time he says lead path.
I should be. I wish I was.
All your spare income is invested in.
Yeah, which is huge, by the way. Yeah.
Being a staff member at the university.
Yeah, you can imagine
Since
Yeah.
I've been there over 30 years, I know what the pay is.
Yeah.
Another one for the farmer, I forgot names already. I understood you to say that the Opportunity Resources clients are not any longer with the farm, but you are still farming as it was?
No, the opportunity with the new CEO that came in, they chose to close the farm.
Was that partly because of the federal problems you had with the laws?
They deemed it wasn't beneficial to the clients.
Really?
Yeah, and so,
Parent of us.
and of course, I disagree with that, but that's a whole nother topic. One thing I will say is any disability that was listed in a client's file never manifested itself at the farm. Not in one, from Prater-Willis to any type of behavior issue.
Yeah, that's something that, I don't know, perhaps the families of the clients who actually were at the farm, maybe they knew about it, but
Yeah, I lobbied to keep it open and did the best we could, and when Jack Chambers was CEO, he was behind it, and we all saw benefits to clients, and so, but that's a whole nother discussion. Across the country, there's farms for not only folks with disabilities, but helping veterans adjust back to living. Look what Garden City Harvest is doing with at-risk youth. And those little farms build community. Even in Detroit, there's guerrilla gardeners that plant vacant lots, and a whole community rises around that. And kids that live in a food desert now have fresh fruit from trees that were planted and fresh vegetables. My son-in-law came out to the farm, grew up in Corning, New York, and we were getting dinner together, and he didn't understand that beets came out of the ground and corn came off of a stalk. He was out there totally amazed. And, you know, right now he's 27. He didn't really know where his food really came from. But that's a whole nother issue. One of the things at the farm is we actually don't mind food waste, or because it's never wasted there. So occasionally we'll leave stuff on the plate or cook extra rice, knowing that the chickens will get it. But in reducing food waste, one thing I will say is we were just gifted an Instapot. And I don't know if you know what those are, but we no longer buy beans in cans. And so not only reducing our food waste, it reduced solid waste and recycling. So now all our beans come in bulk. And we try and gather our beans. We buy it bulk, and we try and use those into reusable containers. So,
Are you getting a kickback from Instapot?
no, you know, I actually don't know how to use it. My partner uses it, and it sits there sort of like a little R2-D2 on the counter, and beeps and lights flash and numbers go up and down. But one thing I will say is the word pulses have ended up into our general lexicon now in America. It was used in a news story on Montana Public Radio last night, referring to Montana becoming the #1 grower of chickpeas and lentils in the country. So I can't stress enough that everything's related. from what you do with what you buy, how you buy it, to the food scraps you generate and where they go and where they end up. And one thing with the composting and using compost is, instead of a chemical fertilizer, is it builds soil. And that you might notice the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels are lower on the compost, because those numbers are what's immediately available to the plants. So if you get Miracle Grow, it's 20, 20, 20. That's what's immediately available to the plant, and then it's gone. With the numbers and with compost, you have those nutrients available for a longer period of time. And so as much as you could keep at your homes and on your home site or small farm or in your community is better for all of us. Everything is really connected. And the other thing is, with the dining services cutting back and using a program to cut back on food scrap, it also impacts the food bank and what food is available there. So it's a fine balancing act keeping the community going. So I would encourage you to throw in an extra tray of lasagna, maybe with the intent of knowing it's going to go to the food bank.
Okay, I think, so for time's sake, I'm going to cut off the questions, but if you have more, you can just come up. I don't know how long you guys can hang out, but you can come up to our panelists and ask questions. So right now, I'm going to have the Hellgate Save Club folks come up, and they have a few words they want to say. Jeremy has a couple closing remarks, and then after that, I'll turn you all loose so you can talk to our neighbors. Caitlin and I are just going to hang out outside, so if you have any composting related questions, we can give you a personal demonstration. Just come visit us outside while we're doing our tabling session. So, Hellgate Save Club.
Oh, great. Thanks for having us. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm Will, and this is Aiden. And we're from Hellgate High School, kind of over there. Yeah, and we're part of the environmental club there called SAVE, and it's been around for a long time. Yeah, let's see, we do like recycling and composting. Yeah, and there's a pretty good membership. Yeah.
Great. And so, me and Will are both in the composting committee, and we have these two bins that circular bins that kind of rotate that we collect from the cafeteria and like from the kids. And we have a lot. I think we almost have too much, which means they're gonna need some more bins. And there's like a little garden that we can dump some in that we recently dug it in, and so it's going well.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just trying to keep the food from the cafeteria, and then just food scraps from people's lunch out of the landfill, I suppose. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah, any questions?
So I am just moving into a apartment for which my window looks out at Hellgate High School.
Uh-huh.
So is there any way that we could get a bin and put that there, and that you would collect that for the condominium?
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's a
like,
really cool idea.
Where would we put it in there? Or,
Here, maybe we can talk.
oh yeah, you could just give me your email, right?
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'll give you my
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so Jeremy's going to come up, say a few closing remarks, and then you all are turned loose. And please do visit our tablers over here because they've been hanging out this whole time. So give them a little attention.
Hello again. I just wanted to say 3 things. One is that we have a email list back on that table back there. If you want to put your name and email down, we'll let you know about what's happening next. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, which is what's happening next. This is our 3rd event in the 0 by 50 community series. The first one was on glass, second was plastic, and then here we are tonight, organics and food. There's ideas for what's going to happen next. We're taking a little break over the summer, and I believe there might be events such as textiles or something related to fast fashion that will come around in the fall. Other ideas that have come up include, help me out.
Disposable food containers?
Oh, okay. Just single-use disposable food packaging. There's a group called Zero Waste Missoula. It's a group of concerned citizens, business owners, individuals around the community who get together, talk about stuff. They're the reason why 0 by 50 is happening. It really was the genesis of this grassroots effort that has resulted in where we are now. That's the group that's kind of brainstormed this whole series and is continuing to talk about what's coming up next. So if anyone is interested in being involved in that, you can put a little star by your name on that email list back there, and I'll be sure to share information with you about next Zero Waste Missoula meeting. The last thing I want to say is regarding the 0by50missoula.com website that I mentioned earlier. There's an element that I failed to mention, and it's that there's a blog component to that site. And we have 3 or so posts from people around the community sharing their stories about what they're doing on their pathway to zero waste. And Caitlin from Soil Cycle, whom you've met already, she is coordinating that. So if any of you want to tell your story about what your journey to zero waste is like, and people can learn from that, then I encourage you to get in touch with Caitlin and become a blogger. Why not? Okay, so I think that's it for now. Thank you all again for coming, and please avail yourselves to these wonderful businesses that are here and stick around for the compost workshop.
Let's put this on.
Yes.